No prisoner status, no proper trial, no mercy. That was the substance of a secret order moving through the German High Command on October 18, 1942. It was aimed at a specific kind of Allied soldier: commandos, raiders, saboteurs, men trained to strike from the dark. If captured in Europe or Africa, they were not to be treated like ordinary prisoners of war. Not if they wore proper uniforms. Not if they tried to surrender. By Hitler's own command, they could be executed without the protections every soldier was supposed to have. Ask yourself what that actually means. What kind of soldier frightens one of the most powerful armies on earth so badly that the answer is not better defenses, more firepower, or better tactics, but a criminal order written in secret? This is the story of that kind of soldier, except he was not one man. He was a few hundred ordinary Americans. Farm boys, factory workers, students, athletes, sons from small towns and big cities who volunteered without knowing exactly what they were signing up for. And the officer who built them, who broke them down in the cold and rebuilt them in the dark, was only 31 years old. His name was William Orlando Darby. He would live long enough to see his men become exactly the kind of soldiers the enemy feared. What he would not live to see was the end of the war he helped win. He would miss it, in the end, by 2 days. Early 1942, America is at war. But in the European theater, the U.S. Army is still unproven. The British have been fighting since 1939. Their commandos have already been raiding the coast of occupied Europe, landing by sea, moving through darkness, hitting a target, vanishing before the enemy can respond. The Americans have courage, they have numbers, they have industry. What they do not have yet is that kind of soldier. General George Marshall and General Lucian Truscott saw the gap. If the United States was going to fight across oceans, mountains, beaches, and fortified coastlines, it needed men who could operate where ordinary infantry could not. Small units, fast movement, night raids, demolitions, surprise. The British called theirs commandos. The Americans reached back into their own history, to the frontier fighters who moved through forests and struck without warning. They called them Rangers. A name is easy. Building the men to carry it is something else entirely. For that job, the Army handed a blank page to a West Point graduate from Fort Smith, Arkansas, an artillery officer, restless and intense, who did not seem built for sitting behind a desk while other men went forward. William Orlando Darby understood something immediately. You do not build Rangers by handing ordinary soldiers a new patch. You change what they believe they can survive. Notices went up across army camps in Northern Ireland. Volunteers wanted. Special unit. Dangerous duty. No further details. That was the first test. A man who needed every answer before stepping forward was not the man Darby was looking for. More than 1,000 volunteered. Only a fraction were chosen. And not always for the reasons you might expect. They were not all the biggest. They were not all the strongest. Some had worked in factories. Some had come off farms. Some were barely out of boyhood. Darby was not only measuring muscle, he was measuring judgment. The ability to stay calm when the body wants to freeze. The ability to keep moving when fear turns physical. The ability to think when confusion is spreading around you. The forge was waiting in Scotland. Achnacarry. The British Commando Basic Training Center sat in the Highlands, surrounded by cold water, rough ground, and weather built to punish soft men. When the Americans arrived, nobody welcomed them gently. They were marched, pushed, watched, and they understood fast that this was not training the way most soldiers understood the word. This was controlled suffering. Speed marches over brutal terrain, obstacle courses under live fire, cold water crossings, cliff work, night movement, demolitions, close quarters fighting, drills with American, British, German, and Italian weapons. None of it was cruelty for its own sake. A man who first hears bullets snap over his head in combat may freeze. So the Rangers heard them in training. A man who first meets real exhaustion in battle may collapse. So they met exhaustion in Scotland. A man who first discovers fear in total darkness may panic. so they learned darkness before the enemy ever saw them. That was Darby's real blueprint. Not stronger bodies, stronger nerves. Every man was made to meet the part of himself that wanted to quit and go past it. Not once, again and again, until continuing became a habit, until fear became familiar. One ranger was killed during training. Others were wounded. The danger was real before a single one of them had faced a German soldier. But Darby did not ask them to suffer anything he would not touch himself. He marched with them, through the same cold, the same mud, the same exhaustion. Because soldiers forgive a great deal in a commander, but they do not forgive one who asks them to suffer what he will not. To Darby, leadership was not a speech, it was evidence. The training was barely finished when the first of them found out what it had been for. On August 19, 1942, 50 of Darby's Rangers joined a mostly Canadian raid on the French port of Dieppe, Operation Jubilee. It was a disaster for the larger force, one of the costliest single days of the war for the Canadians who carried it. But it was also something else. The first time American ground troops fought the Germans in Europe in this war. The Rangers helped knock out an enemy gun battery. 3 of them did not come home. 3 names in a raid most people have never heard of, months before America's better-known landings even began. Darby's men had paid their first price before most Americans even knew their name. November 1942, Operation Torch. America's first major ground offensive against Axis forces in the Mediterranean theater opens across the beaches of French North Africa. At Anzio, Algeria, Darby's Rangers get the kind of mission that explains exactly why they exist. Coastal batteries have to go silent before the main landing. If those guns keep firing, landing craft full of men can be torn apart in the water. There is no time for a slow, conventional assault, no room for hesitation, no margin for men who need comfort before action. They go in before dawn, small boats, cold water, fortified positions ahead. The training holds, the batteries fall, the beaches open, and the larger invasion comes ashore at a fraction of the cost it could have paid. Somewhere up the chain of command, a quiet realization starts to form. These are not ordinary infantry. They are not built to hold a long line. They are built to solve a problem fast, violently, before the enemy understands what is happening to him. That is exactly what makes them valuable, and exactly what makes them dangerous. One landing does not build a legend. A legend needs repetition, under conditions where failure should be the expected outcome. By the winter and spring of 1943, the fighting in Tunisia has turned rough, dirty, and unforgiving. Broken terrain, cold nights, an enemy with experience. At El Guettar, American forces are stuck against positions that cannot be taken head-on. Darby's Rangers find another way, and that could describe their entire purpose. Where a normal plan sees a blocked road, they look for a ridge, a dry riverbed, a dark approach nobody believes men will actually use. Because if the enemy thinks the ground is impossible, he may not bother defending it. And once he stops defending it, impossible becomes an entrance. They move at night, miles over rough ground, weapons carried, noise controlled, metal taped down, faces blacked out. Each man carrying months of Scotland in his muscles. By dawn, they are exactly where the enemy never expected Americans to be. Behind him, above him, too close. The attack comes fast, and for the men on the receiving end, the violence is not even the worst part. It is the question that follows. How did they get here? That question is one of the most effective weapons in war. Once the enemy cannot explain how you arrived, he starts to fear where you might appear next. Darby's Rangers do not need to be everywhere. They only need the enemy to believe they might be. From North Africa to Sicily, the pattern repeats. Night, speed, surprise, small units clearing a path for larger forces. But Sicily adds something new. At Gela, the Rangers are not only raiders this time, they are holders. They land before dawn, they fight into the town, they take positions, they help direct naval gunfire. Then, German armor arrives. For a lightly armed force, tanks rolling toward your position are not an inconvenience, they are a nightmare. A rifleman facing armor in a narrow street learns exactly how small a man can feel. This is not what Rangers were built for. Not a raid, not a quick strike, not a silent movement through darkness. This is holding ground against armor, in daylight. But Darby had not built soldiers to measure fear and obey it. The Rangers hold. Using captured weapons, mortars, naval gunfire called in close, and a flat refusal to behave like men who have already lost. The beachhead survives, the invasion continues, and by now, the enemy has seen enough to understand these are not the same green Americans who showed up only months earlier. Something has changed in them, and it has changed too fast for comfort. This brings us back to that secret order. The commando order was not written for Darby alone. It was broader than that. It targeted Allied commando-style operations, raids, infiltration, sabotage, small teams operating behind or near enemy lines. Exactly the kind of warfare men like Darby were training Americans to fight. The Nazi justification came wrapped in legal language and accusations, but underneath it, the meaning was simple. These soldiers were a problem the German system did not want to solve by the normal rules of war. So Berlin changed the rules. That is why the order matters here. Not because any single Ranger mission caused it directly, but because it reveals exactly what kind of soldier Darby was building. One who moved in darkness. One who could live without comfort. One who could strike where the map said no attack should be possible. One who made entire formations feel unsafe just by existing somewhere nearby. And one who, if captured under the wrong conditions, might not be protected by the laws meant to protect every man in uniform. These were not supermen. They were Americans in their 20s. Some had probably never left their home state before the war. Some had mothers waiting on letters. Some had wives. Some had children who might come to know them only from photographs if the war took them. And they volunteered for a kind of service where simply being captured could become a death sentence. That is not just courage. That is a contract with uncertainty, signed in advance. For a while, the blueprint works. North Africa, Sicily, Italy. The reputation grows with every mission. But every method has a condition built into it. Surprise needs darkness. Speed needs room. Infiltration needs gaps in the enemy's awareness. And if the enemy ever knows exactly where you are headed, the same tactics that made you dangerous can become a trap. The Germans had finally learned the lesson. If you cannot stop Rangers in the dark, make sure they meet the sunrise in open ground. January 30th, 1944, Anzio. The Allied beachhead in Italy is under heavy pressure, and the plan to break out runs through the town of Cisterna. The 1st and 3rd Ranger battalions get an order that asks for everything Rangers are supposed to do well. Infiltrate through German lines in darkness, reach Cisterna, take the town before sunrise. On paper, it is a textbook Ranger mission. In reality, the Germans had quietly reinforced the area the night before, and they were waiting. The Rangers move out after midnight, using a drainage ditch for cover. For hours, it looks like it might actually work. They slip through the darkness, bypass positions, keep moving. Then dawn arrives before they reach the objective, and daylight is merciless. 767 men are caught in open ground, surrounded by German infantry, armor, and prepared positions. Every advantage they had is gone within minutes. No darkness, no surprise, no clean route in, no easy way out. Small groups fight from wherever they happen to be standing. One officer climbs onto a German tank and drops a phosphorus grenade inside. It buys minutes, not a way out. Ammunition runs low, then lower. The wounded pile up faster than anyone can move them. The Germans keep closing. This is the part of the story that matters most, because a version that only tells you about the victories is not telling you the truth. Darby's Rangers were brave, they were elite, they were feared. And at Cisterna, a great many of them were destroyed. Hundreds were killed, wounded, or captured. Only a handful made it back through the lines. For families back home, the news did not arrive as a full story. It came in fragments. Missing, wounded, captured, killed. sometimes no certainty at all. A mother might know only that her son had vanished somewhere in Italy. A wife might wait for weeks, hoping that missing did not mean dead. That was the war behind the war. Not maps, not arrows, not famous speeches, just families waiting for a name to become a fact. Back at headquarters, when word of what had happened reached Darby, he told his staff to leave the room. Then, alone, he put his head down and wept. These were not strangers on a casualty list to him. They were men he had personally selected, trained, marched beside through cold water and darkness, because he had asked them to, and because he had never once asked them to go anywhere he would not go himself. A commander can absorb a great deal. Losing men he believes he helped make is a different kind of wound, one that does not close easily. After Cisterna, the original Ranger force in Italy was effectively broken. The survivors were reassigned. The unit Darby had built from nothing, recruit by recruit, was finished as a fighting formation. A weaker version of this story would end right there, with defeat, with the Germans holding the field, with Rangers dead, captured, or scattered. But legacy is not only measured by who holds a town on a single morning. Sometimes it is measured by what survives the disaster. In a strange and painful way, Cisterna proved the real cost of using elite soldiers badly. It showed Rangers were not magic. They were never meant to be thrown at every problem the army had. They were a blade, and a blade can break if you use it like a hammer. But the method survived. The training survived. The standard survived. Led from the front, move in darkness, trust small units. Expect your officers to do the hard thing first. Keep moving after the body asks you to stop. Those lessons outlived the men who first learned them, shivering in Scotland. On June 6, 1944, a different group of Rangers under different commanders climbed the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc under direct German fire. Ropes, grapnels, machine guns above them, the sea behind them. By any reasonable measure, it was a mission common sense should have rejected. They climbed anyway. Because someone had already proven American soldiers could be trained to move toward the impossible instead of away from it. That is the real bridge between Darby and everything that came after him. Not one operation, not one patch, a standard. William Orlando Darby went back to combat before the war in Europe ended. By April 1945, with Germany collapsing, he was serving in Italy near Lake Garda, leading a task force that bore his name in the final push to break the German line. For millions of men, survival was finally starting to feel possible again. Home was no longer just a dream beyond the horizon. It was close enough to think about. On April 30th, 1945, while Darby was issuing orders for an attack meant to cut off a German retreat, an artillery shell burst in the middle of the assembled officers. It killed Darby instantly. He was 34 years old. 2 days later, German forces in Italy surrendered. 2 days. After Scotland, after Dieppe, after Arzew, Guettar, Sicily, Anzio, after the men he lost and the unit that was broken and rebuilt in memory. Darby died almost at the very end. He never got to grow old in the country he helped defend. He never got decades to tell his own story. He never got to sit with grandchildren and explain what the Highlands felt like in the rain. Like so many of the men he trained, he became part of the silence that followed the war. But the silence did not mean the story was over. Today, the name Ranger still carries weight. And it carries that weight because men like Darby gave it to them. Not with slogans, not with speeches, but with cold mornings, night marches, beaches taken before dawn, and men who kept moving when everything in them said stop. With failures painful enough to teach something. With a standard that outlived the men who first carried it. The German Order of 1942 was written to frighten commandos back into the shadows. It did not work. The ambush at Cisterna was meant to destroy the Rangers in Italy, and it did destroy a great many of them. But it did not destroy what Darby built. That is the part the enemy never fully understood. You can kill men, you can capture entire battalions, you can write orders in secret rooms. But if those men have already changed the standard for everyone who comes after them, the thing you feared has already gotten away from you. William Orlando Darby started with volunteers and a blank page. He ended with a legacy. And somewhere between the cold hills of Scotland and the last shell that found him in Italy, he proved something every generation of American soldiers after him would come to understand. Elite units are not born, they are built. And sometimes the enemy tells you exactly how much they are worth, by the rules he is willing to break just to try to stop them. One family got a telegram that said, "Missing." Another got one that said, "Killed." Another heard nothing for weeks. That happened to thousands of families in this country, not just from Cisterna, but from every beach, every hedgerow, every cold ridge of that war. Somebody's grandfather, somebody's great-uncle, a name that might only survive now in a box of old photographs or in a story told once at Thanksgiving and never written down anywhere. So before you go, if someone in your family served in this war, or any war, whether they came home or did not, put their name in the comments. Just the name, and where they served if you know it. Not for likes. Just so it is written down somewhere, by someone, one more time. Their names deserve to outlast the silence too.